Hey everybody, welcome to episode 2 of Unlearning Unlicensed. In this video series, I am going to be going through RF Element's so-called educational content and correcting the myths, misconceptions, and misunderstandings that have been perpetuated by RF Elements for more than a decade, ever since they introduced their antennas to the WISP industry. And this is a really interesting video because you get to see the history of RF Element's misleading marketing and how they got started. And this is a session from WISPAMERICA 2016 where they're introducing their new sectors, our revolution. They're introducing their symmetrical sectors, which are what they called their symmetrical horn antennas at the time. And they are introducing their so-called carrier class sector panel antenna as well. And I am skipping to the 19-minute and 24-second mark in this video, which is the beginning of the question and answer period, because we get a really interesting question from the audience, and then RF Elements responds in a very interesting way as well. Let's take a listen.
Is that the same or similar sector that comes with the ePMP 5 GHz?
So it looks the same. It looks the same. We actually manufactured back in the day the ePMP based on their specs, not our specs. This antenna is totally redesigned internally. It's our own specifications. So it just looks similar on the outside, but it performs way better.
Okay, so there's a lot there. I'm going to back up to the product comparison sheet that they put on the screen. So he says that they were the underlying manufacturer of the Cambium ePMP sectors, sector antennas. And it looks the same from the outside, but they redesigned the inside. So what that means is that Cambium designed their sector panel antennas and then provided those designs to RF Elements for RF Elements to be the manufacturer. So Cambium was the designer of the antennas, and then RF Elements was the manufacturer. Basically, it was RF Elements' job to go put the pieces together and build the antennas as per Cambium's designs. And apparently they did that. So they built these antennas, and then Cambium created new antennas. If they continued using RF Elements as the supplier, I don't know. But RF Elements then took those Cambium designs and the tooling, the assembly process, and modified it a little bit internally and created competitive products to Cambium. In other words, they copied Cambium's designs as the factory. This is the same thing that they accused Isohorns of doing in 2023 when we introduced our products. So when we posted to WISP Talk, we said, hey, we've got our new 6 gigahertz horn antennas, our wideband antennas, high performance antennas. And 2 out of 3 RF Elements partners commented that we were copying RF Elements. They say, show me the horn that looked like RF Elements' asymmetrical horn before RF Elements. Tazos, who's speaking in this seminar here, he says, you will never find a horn that looks like ours before us. Now they all look like ours. They are accusing Isohorns of copying their product. What's insidious about this is that we weren't copying RF Elements at all. In no way were we copying RF Elements. We weren't using their tooling. We weren't copying their design. We weren't copying their product. We were introducing brand new product that the WISP industry, there was no product like this in the WISP industry. And in fact, we wouldn't have got started producing this product if RF Elements was doing their job and producing 6 gigahertz antennas, wideband antennas, or high performance antennas. RF Elements wasn't doing any of those things, so of course we couldn't copy them when we're introducing the first of this type of antenna. Now, they say straight up that they were the supplier for Cambium. It looks the same as Cambium because they are using the same parts. So here's the Cambium product, and here's the RF Elements product. You can see that the brackets are the same. Likely the radome is the same. The only thing that really appears different outwardly is that the placement of the radio. But other than that, this basically looks like the same product. Now it's hard to say because I don't have the front picture. I'm looking at the back on this one, and then we're looking at the front on this one. But essentially they're saying we were the underlying supplier. We didn't create the design. We copied the design and we made modifications to it. So RF Elements got started in the antenna business by copying Cambium's product, but not just like being inspired by it, by running the factory after hours, basically. Like Cambium had their production run, and RF Elements was the supplier for that initial production, and then after they finished supplying, they kept the assembly lines going. They kept building on Cambium's design. Did they pay Cambium for that? I don't know. I don't know if they had an arrangement to do that or not. However, it's worth noticing that not only does RF Elements falsely accuse their competitors of copying them, but go back to 2016 and RF Elements was doing the same thing that they're falsely accusing their competitors of doing. It's projection. But the other thing is that now RF Elements doesn't like product comparisons. They don't like it when Isohorns compares side by side with RF Elements because we totally dominate them in terms of product performance. So they no longer like product comparisons, and their fans deem it unprofessional for me to talk about RF Elements products. They say, if your products are so much better, then you should just let your products stand on their own. You shouldn't compare your products to your competitors. Well, rewind back to when RF Elements was getting started. Guess what they did? Product comparisons. And while I always try to be fair with my product comparisons, RF Elements is very much not fair with their product comparisons. So even though RF Elements is the underlying supplier for these two antennas, they go on to disparage these two antennas unfairly. So right here, front to back ratio, RF Elements greater than 29 dB. They give themselves a check mark. Cambium, greater than 32 dB, greater than 32 dB. Well, RF Elements at least gives them a check mark as well. But really, the check mark should be here, not here. This should be a red X. And this isn't a small difference. 3 dB is twice the front to back ratio. So remember, with decibels, that's a logarithmic scale, and 3 dB is twice the front to back ratio. So that's the difference between 29 dB and 32 dB. But it's not just the front to back ratio that RF Elements is misleading about. They're also even worse with the VSWR. So here, VSWR, RF Elements, 1.35. What is RF Elements VSWR as per their own spec sheet? VSWR max, 1.8. VSWR typical, 1.35. So this is the value that they're using. Now they're comparing that against Cambium. So Cambium VSWR is 1.6 and 1.7. So let's go to Cambium's data sheet here and take a look at their VSWR value. So there it is, VSWR, 1.6 max, 1.7 max. So if you're going to do a fair comparison, this should be 1.8 here. It should be a red X. 1.6 should be a green check mark. 1.7 should be a green check mark. 1.6 and 1.7 VSWR is better than 1.8. But they confuse intentionally VSWR typical, and they put their VSWR typical here, while they put Cambium's VSWR max here. But this isn't the only way that they're misleading about this product comparison. The most important antenna parameter is not gain, is not VSWR, is not front to back ratio, and it's not port isolation. But actually, the most important antenna parameter is frequency range, because that determines the compatibility of the radio. So they say antenna type 5 gigahertz, 20 dBi. That's what they call this product. It's called the carrier class 5 gigahertz 20 dBi antenna. And they say 5 gigahertz all over the place. Is it a 5 gigahertz antenna? Sort of. It's actually 5.45 to 5.85. And you can see that the gain drops off substantially in the lower 5 gigahertz range. They specify that down here, 5.45 to 5.85. So when they say that they have better VSWR, which they don't, but that's measuring the VSWR within a very narrow frequency range. So not only do they not have better VSWR while claiming they have better VSWR, this is from a much more narrow frequency range. What's the frequency range of the Cambium sector? 5.15 to 5.97. This is a substantially wider frequency range than the RF element sector. The RF element sector is a 20 dBi sector, whereas these are 15 and 14 dBi sectors. They get that by compressing the elevation beam width. So you can see the elevation beam width here, negative 3 dB, is 4 degrees, whereas the Cambium is 8 degrees elevation beam width. So all they did basically is compress the elevation beam width to get more gain, and then they have a much more narrow frequency range, and that's all that they have. However, in this presentation back here, they're comparing their this product. So this is the RF elements sector carrier class 5 gigahertz. This is the 17. Okay. What they show is that it has no side lobes or back lobes. So they say that they have this built-in back shield, so you don't need RF armor, and you don't get this radiation coming out the back, or this radiation coming out the back. And so that's what they say about their sector. That's why their sector is good. Well, that shows up in the front to back ratio. That is described as an antenna parameter in the front to back ratio. And again, the Cambium sectors have twice as good front to back ratio as the RF elements antenna. So frequency range, very narrow, and misleading to call this a 5 gigahertz antenna when it doesn't support the entire 5 gigahertz band. The VSWR is fake because they're using VSWR typical, whatever that means. And then they're comparing against VSWR max. Their front to back ratio is actually worse, but they say that it's better. And they create these misleading graphics showing that it's better when it's not. And although they're comparing against ubiquity sector, the same principles hold true, though. This is just nonsense. They're just making this up. So show me where this was measured. These are simply pretty graphics. This is like a toothbrush commercial using CGI to say that their toothbrush is somehow special. It's like the fancier the graphics, the more nonsensical the value proposition. And then they go on. They've got their isolation here. This is interesting because with their symmetrical horn antennas, they don't tell you what the isolation is, but they do show you the isolation on their on the antenna that they copied from Cambium. And they also show the cross-pole isolation, which they stopped showing these two antenna parameters with their horn antennas. But notice that RF Elements used to do product comparisons, and when they did product comparisons, they were misleading. So don't have any patience for the people that say, if a product is in fact better, David, if your product is better, then let it speak for itself. You shouldn't be comparing your product to your competitors. RF Elements compared their product to their competitors, and they did so in a misleading way. And it appears that they copied Cambium's antenna designs. Thanks for watching.